Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for today's panel. Welcome to the APS webinars. The title of today's webinar is Adjusting Lab Practices During a Pandemic. I'm Tiffany Nichols, Chair of the Forum of Graduate Student Affairs, and will be your host for today's broadcast. So thank you all for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insights into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's panel is sponsored by the Forum of Graduate Student Affairs and the Forum on Early Career Scientists, along with APS. We have 6 panelists and a moderator who will be sharing their insights and expertise on changes to the laboratory practices brought about by the pandemic. While we have prepared some questions for the program, this program also belongs to you, so feel free to ask questions during the session. Because of the number of people who are attending the webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So please type your questions into the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to cover all the questions that you submit, but we want to apologize if you are unable to cover everything. So finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event and will be made available on the webinar homepage. But please allow 48 hours for this video to be uploaded. So we encourage you to complete a survey that will be sent with the video link so that APS webinars can improve the ability to provide you with valuable services. So we will get started. So our moderator today is Karen Daniels. So Karen Daniels is a professor of physics at NC State University. Her lab investigates a number of problems in the deformation and failure of materials, from fluid flows to piles of sand and fractured gels. In 2011, or from 2011 to 2012, she received an Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship, which allowed her to spend a year conducting research in Göttingen, Germany. She has received an NSF Faculty Early Career Development Award and was an APS Fellow in 2018. Then we have Carla Froelich. Carla joined the faculty at NC State University in 2010 and is currently an associate professor in physics. She is a Cottrell Scholar and a Research Corporation Zilog Fellow in the time domain astrophysics. Her research is in computational astrophysics, and she discovered a new nucleosynthesis process, the neutrino P process, which for the first time allowed to explain some observed abundances in metal poor stars. Her current research focuses on predicting multi-messenger signals such as nuclei, neutrinos, electromagnetic signals, and gravitational waves from various types of supernovae. She also works with colleagues in nuclear physics to identify and constrain the relevant nuclear physics in supernovae. So we also have Sojana Galapani. So Sojana is a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory and adjunct faculty member at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her research focuses on studying the elusive particles in the universe called neutrinos. She builds gigantic experiments to study these tiny particles to understand the biggest puzzles in the universe, from the structure of the atom to the formation of a star. She also works on many neutrino experiments such as the microboon and the deep underground neutrino experiment. Joining us also is Shane Larsen. So Shane is Associate Director of Northwestern University's Center for Interscopular Exploratory and Research in Astrophysics. He is a gravitational wave astrophysicist who works primarily on LISA, and in particular on the vast population of dead stellar binaries in the Milky Way. We have Jennifer Ross. She is a professor in physics at Syracuse University and an award-winning biophysicist who studies the organization of microtubular exoskeleton and enzymes using high-resolution single molecular imaging techniques. Ross has a PhD in physics and is a fellow in the American Physical Society, a Cottrell Scholar, and won the Margaret Oakley Dayhoff Award from the Biophysics Society. Vanessa C. is also joining us, and She is a condensed matter experimentalist who conducts pump probe optical measurements on electron and nuclear spin polarization in materials. She was an undergraduate at Caltech and completed her PhD at UC Santa Barbara. She joined the physics faculty at the University of Michigan in 2008 and is currently serving as the associate chair for the physics graduate program. And last but not least, we have Eric Weeks, and he is a soft condensed matter experimentalist. He has been on the faculty at Emory University since January 2001 and is currently a Samuel Cadler-Dobbs Professor of Physics. He is the chair of the APS topical group on statistical and nonlinear physics, and he is an APS fellow. Since the summer of 2018, he has been the director of Emory University's Center for Faculty Development and Excellence, which works with faculty across the whole university. His current laboratory group has 7 students, only two of whom expect to re-enter the laboratory space this summer. So I will now hand the panel over to our moderator, Karen Daniels.
All right, thanks a lot. So Tiffany, if you can go to the next slide, then everybody can see the names you all just read while we get going, in case you want to know who we are. So I have a set of prepared questions that I will use to kick us off. And then we're going to have moderators who are standing by to take questions from the audience that will supplement these. So if you have a question that's a follow-on to the ones we're saying, please go ahead and use the Q&A to enter to us. All right, so excellent. Here is who we all are. So what I'm going to start is for all of the panelists in this order that's listed here on there, to tell us just briefly in a minute what has happened so far in their labs with lab closures, where are you right now, and in the whole opening process. Yeah, so Carla.
All right, so my research is in computational astrophysics. So my lab is not really a lab with hands-on work, which made the transition to working from home, from the research standpoint, much easier for us because we work from home via computer. What we did in the process of transitioning to working from home is making sure that all group members have all the infrastructure they need, be that a webcam, a second monitor, bringing home a computer from the university so they have the computational power they need to work from home. We are obviously still in working from home mode, and as not having a hands-on lab, we're certainly not first in line to come back to campus, so I foresee us to be working from home for the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you. All right, so Donna.
Oh, hi everybody. Let me just say that I hope everybody's doing well during these times. Yeah, basically, largely what Carla said also applies at my institute. I'm from Los Alamos National Lab, so my perspective will probably largely focus on the lab side. So during the peak times, we did close the lab like many other places, and you know, halfway into that process, we also started thinking about restart, just planning and preparation, you know, and there were heavy restrictions at the time. Now I think we're very slowly restarting, but trying to ensure that we have the PPE, the gloves and masks and such, so everybody who comes there can use them. So they're being made available at the lab entrances, so you don't have to go too much into the lab to get them. Also, I think, you know, if you do plan to come in now, you still need approvals higher up to get there. And you know, you need to ensure in the justification that you provide that you're going to follow all the guidelines with COVID, and anybody who comes is volunteering and willing to come. So I think, you know, anybody who feels they're not safe, they're totally, you know, they can stay home. So that's where we are. I think it's going to progress this way for quite some time. And the message we heard from the highest management of the lab told us that, you know, the idea is that most people still work from home, even in the next year or so, and then only essential people will come on the lab.
Thank you. Shane.
There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Larsen. I'm at Northwestern University. I'm the Associate Director of our Interdisciplinary Center for Astrophysics and also a professor in the physics department. Illinois, as most of you probably know, is a very hot spot for this current pandemic. The state has a very stringent stay-at-home rule in place right now, which Northwestern is certainly following. Right now, campus is completely closed and laboratory work for everyone is shut down. Only essential personnel are allowed on campus at all. And in the context of laboratories, that really has reduced itself to things like filling helium dewars and these kinds of things. There's no actual formal laboratory work going on campus right now. Those of us who are theorists, we certainly are attempting our best to work from home, as many of us are. Our computational resources that we have access to are still operating, but we are all navigating, as many institutions are, kind of secure access and VPN networks and all of that sort of thing. Quite inconveniently, our campus moved to a new VPN system just right as this was happening. And so it took a little while for those kinds of kinks to get worked out for those of us who have that kind of research need. Plan for opening is largely going to follow the state, and the state's slowly trying to reopen, but right now we're on the cusp of whether or not that's going to lead to the reopening of laboratories or not. So I think right now the next few weeks will tell us a lot about how the university is going to restart the research enterprise, but we are all moving along as the best we can right now.
All right, thank you, Shane. Jenny.
Yeah, so I'm in a kind of interesting position because I just moved to Syracuse University in August, which means actually I have half of my lab, a little less than half now, still at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is where I moved from. It has given me an inside view of what two different universities are doing, so that's kind of interesting. When we went into spring break, both schools were going into spring break at the same time. Syracuse made the call early. UMass made that call to not come back from spring break late. But then UMass actually closed for everything but essential workers kind of right away, and then they reversed. So I'm seeing a lot of saying something and reversing, and so it's very confusing, right? Because the management is kind of all over the place. But what I decided to do is just figure out whichever lab has the most stringent thing and just do whatever that is doing. So whichever university is telling me. So once UMass said, hey, only essential workers, even though they reversed themselves, I actually closed my lab then. So that was about a week earlier than New York State was closed down. And partly it was because I had seen some data out of South Korea saying that the age group of my laboratory was the #1 age group for having the disease. So to me, that it made sense for that age group to be, starting to social distance as early as possible. So that's kind of what I went with, sharing the data with my lab. We closed down. I moved several people onto writing. I had 2 students. My UMass students are actually doing their theses right now. So instead of doing a couple more experiments, their thesis is just what it is right now. So they moved into writing mode. The 2 who moved with me to Syracuse are also in writing mode. Similar things where they were writing papers, but they just wanted one more experiment. And I just said, nope, no more experiments. You're gonna actually just start writing. And that was really useful. They did not have all the technology like Carla mentioned. So I was very happy. Syracuse actually allowed me to order brand new, like incredibly powerful computers and have them shipped directly to their homes. So they were both now able to, one was running new simulations as part of a paper. Another one just needed to do data analysis and something a little more powerful than her laptop. And so they were both able to get outfitted with what they needed. We did go in asynchronously at first. I have a major fear of old physics buildings leaking on my equipment. So we all went in asynchronously and piled a plastic wrap over every piece of major equipment in the lab so that, because unlike low temperature, we can just shut everything down, put everything in a freezer and just walk away. And so that's basically what we did. So the lab looks very sad. we are in the process of planning to go back right now. Both universities look like they're about to relaunch at about the same time. And again, we're doing the same thing. You know, every time I get, here's a training from one university, I send it to the whole lab. Everybody takes this training. When I get something from another university, so whatever is the strictest thing is kind of what we're doing. So I'm kind of keeping my lab consistent between both universities.
Great, thank you. Vanessa.
The University of Michigan research labs were shut down in mid-March, and we're now in the early phases of reopening and making plans for that reopening.
All right, and then Eric.
I've been working from home since mid-March, and that was a little bit before the university was completely shut down, but I made sure that my lab group knew that they could work from home if they were getting concerned then. So there was a variety of people in my group that ranged from immediately working from home to pushing the limit until we were asked to close. And then as a state, Georgia's been open in some ways for quite a while now. Emory is going a little bit slower on the research reopening, but we should have things starting to open up next week. And there will be a couple of us in the lab part-time at least next week.
All right, thank you everybody. So that gives you some introduction of the range of experiences we're all having. And I want to ask, what if some of you guys have brought this up already, but have there been institutional or external resources that you have found particularly useful and needed to utilize during this period? And so panelists can raise their hand if they want me to notice them. And I think Carla has something to add here.
Yes, so resources, I think, is a very important ingredient for us to having made that transition to working from home. And these resources are on various levels, so certainly peer networks within the department, the university, but also I have to give a shout out to Research Corporation here. The Critical Scholar Network has been extremely valuable and helpful to exchange ideas and have a resource to how to go forward. And other extremely valuable resource I think I would like to point out is my own group, my student, graduate and undergraduate student, in the sense of we were looking at how can we replace a student walk into my office because they have a quick question. How can we reproduce that in the working from home setting? And so I brought that up with the group and said, this is the kind of thing I'd like us to be able to do. And they proposed software. They actually got me to use Slack. I'm admitting my technological age with this, but they brought up a solution, we tested it, and they proposed a solution that we're now using and working, that is working for our group. I think that's an important point, to not forget that your group can also contribute to resources that make the whole lab work better.
All right, thank you. Are there other folks on the panel who want to weigh in on that?
Sorry, can I say something here?
Yeah, please.
This is Saujanya, yeah. I just wanted to share a bit of my personal experience in actually, I was able to do things I wanted to do, but it also made me realize that how everyone is supporting each other. Just want to acknowledge that with my experience. So there are two things that I thought would be impossible to do during this time. One is, I was trying to ship a hazardous equipment. It's still used in experiment, but given some of the contents and chemicals in it, it's hazardous. I was actually trying to ship that overseas. And I was also trying to set up a lab here that uses a very dangerous laser. I was sort of giving up, but then I thought, let's try. And, this required support from a lot of groups within the lab. For example, shipping department, people who evaluate safety, engineers, electrical, engineers who would do the construction and the other setup. I just want to acknowledge that I was pleasantly surprised that, while we're all in the same boat, when I actually wrote to them, everybody came through and supported the effort. And I was able to actually ship something overseas this time and also making good progress with the lab. I just wanted to mention this just to, you know, I think people are being very supportive. So it's okay to come out and ask for help. And you know, you may get the support you need. This is a very specific example, very technical, but I think that's also true for many other cases.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think that this brings, you know, that we're drawing on all of these resources, whether it's within our groups or our departments or our institutions. So I was going to ask, how are you and that group and that department negotiating solutions that meet everyone's needs, right? And this extends between safety and deadlines, you know, whether it's faculty or student deadlines, visas, health, and, you know, sort of privacy concerns all in that. And so this is something I think that gets to a lot of the questions that I'm seeing coming up in the Q&A. So I think some folks are going to see some of their questions answered during this. And so I was going to start with Eric on this one.
I have thoughts. Our department and our university has been really concerned both about safety, but also about some of the power dynamics, about students feeling pressured to go back into labs before they themselves are willing to go back into labs. And also staff as well, not just students. For the students, at least, there's been a pretty good process such that the PI has to sign off and say that, yes, the student needs to be back in the lab and explain that a little bit. And usually it's just straightforward in saying, well, they need to make progress towards their PhD work. But then the student has to then affirm that they want to be back in the lab, and this gets signed off by the graduate dean to make sure that nobody's feeling too much pressure. Now, that's not a perfect solution, but at least it says that it's not just up to the advisor to say, oh yes, you need to be back in the lab and make the decision for the students. I can say that for myself, I've tried to ask people what they really want to do and then be very mindful of their responses and not to say, well, I think you should be in the lab, and to just try and make it as easy as possible for them to obey their own conscience. As far as some of the other questions you asked, things like PPE and safety, in a way, it's a bit like what Jenny Ross was saying. I'm leaving a lot of that decision to the school to decide what they think is most safe, and they're giving us a lot of advice about what PPE to wear and so forth. And then when in doubt, I'm defaulting to something that's even safer than that. Or if the department is making decisions, I'm going between the safest thing between what the student wants, what the department wants, and what the university wants. So I'll leave my answer there and let somebody else take a turn at this.
Carla, do you have something to add to that?
So as a computational group with no lab, we don't have that imminent urgent need to think about PPE and how to bring students back. I made a very conscious decision early on when we transitioned to working from home. We actually my group started working from home before the university forced us to communicate very openly with my group why I'm starting to work from home now and encouraging them to do what they feel is safest for them, as in if they want to start working from home earlier than needed, that I'm supporting that. And throughout the process, keep asking them explicitly, like, what do you need? Do you feel safe the way we're doing this? How can we address concerns that you may have? And as far as I can tell, that has worked quite well, that they're open and willing to say what works and doesn't work, and we can adjust as we go. But I think in my case, and this is just within my group, it's having a very conscious and open discussion with all the group members about safety has helped us to be all on the same page where we're standing and where we want to go.
Yeah, so Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, just echoing what everybody else is saying, we're doing this as a team, right? So certainly nobody is going to be forced to go back in the lab if they're not comfortable with it, at least in my lab. But the other thing is we're kind of planning together. We're taking all the information we're getting from the universities, we're looking at it, and we're even going a little farther. Like, we have one lab at UMass that has very long benches. And so we are gonna take, just like in the grocery stores, this is an up aisle, that's a down aisle, so that people aren't doing this. And there's only gonna be 2 people in the room, so you'd think they'd be able to communicate, but as we all know, sometimes your head is down and you're trying to do a thing. And so just making kind of setting those expectations with each other early and doing it as a group, coming up with the solutions as a group. The other thing is, I was thinking that, I have 2 projects I'd like to keep going, and I have 2 students kind of who can be buddies on each one. And I was kind of thinking of alternating them, and my students were the ones who actually came up with, well, I really need a week. So we're actually alternating weeks. So one team will be in for 1 week, and then they, and every day they'll clean down and all this stuff, but they'll be the same 2 people. They're, in a sense, they have a bubble. So their bubble will include their teammate on their project. And that's for safety, because as people have been asking about, like, what if there's high voltage, things like this. Every lab has dangers, and you do need a buddy in there. And then they clean everything down by the end of the week. There's a 2-day, nobody in the lab on the weekend. The next team comes in, clean everything up, and they are in there for a week kind of doing their thing. And so that's the way for us that my students really wanted to do it. Sometimes we make a protein and then it dies. So they needed a few days after making the protein to get it to work. And so we work together on these plans.
So I think then just to fill in is that, so that was in regards to, there's an answer there to Anne's question about 2-person rules and how we satisfy them. So the panelists are seeing some of your questions too. So they are addressing them, if they don't mention you by name. And I think this idea of a buddy system, so being close but not too close, so that you can have both epidemiological safety and laboratory hazard safety is where this negotiation needs to take place. Shane.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this statement that we constantly make about people coming back when they're comfortable. We saw this a lot when we first shut down, but I think it's going to be even more true when we start up again, which is those of us who are in leadership, those of us who are faculty members, all of us will come to the table, just like every member of your group or every member of your department, with your own sense of what your comfort with the safety is. And I think the most important thing we have to remember as faculty and leaders is that if we show up, everyone under us will feel compelled to show up as well. And if your personal safety threshold lets you show up before anyone else in your group does, I think one of the things you have to be really, really cognizant of is, even if you say you don't have to come to work if you're not comfortable, they're going to feel compelled to come to work if you're there. And I can't stress that enough. And not all faculty and not everyone understands that, but I definitely think it's true.
All right, thanks. And next, Sojana has some stuff to add to this as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit more about given this the unusual situation we are in, thinking more in terms of a student's perspective. For example, there's intersection of power dynamics, retaliation, and I think just sharing some practical thoughts that I have seen that has worked. So I mean, we all say to our team that your well-being is more important than research or any other deadline. But how do we how to make that work in reality? I think that's a challenging question. And this does not just pertain to lab work. Actually, for lab work, we know there's Ppe, there are challenges there. But even for students who are trying to meet deadlines with analysis, with conference deadlines, for example, or thesis, there is definitely pressure. And there's a few ways that, it's hard to go to your supervisor and say, just being in my home and working on computer is not an easy thing to do, and it's adding some pressure. So there's, some of the ways the students can mitigate, the situation and reduce retaliation would be, if you're working within an analysis group, or if you're in an institution or a department, you can go to your unit, and then, or as a group, what you can suggest is that the group have a proxy, as in a person who is, involved, related to the analysis, but not as quite involved as the core group. And if you have any issues with the pressure and mental health and stress and all of that, you go and tell that to the proxy, and that proxy is going to then use the right words and messaging to communicate to the group. That way you reduce individual retaliation on you. there are other ways to mitigate this. Most collaborations, for example, I work under big collaborations, and most of them have, student groups or postdoc groups where they can talk more freely. So one way is to communicate your concerns there and have a more broader message delivered either to your analysis group or to the collaboration leaders, who can then try to address on a broader scale what to do. I also noticed one can, as a supervisors, we could do accommodations in the meeting formats, something as simple as starting and ending the meeting, where you can talk about the general well-being of people, or the movies you watched, or a nice picture of nature shot that you got while you're walking. All that, sorts of lights up the overall situation and eases the students a little bit. Yeah, I'll stop here. I just wanted to share that.
So Carla, go ahead, and then we're going to sort of broaden this so you guys have a chance to think for a second. There have been a bunch of requests that we broaden this to include teaching labs and not just research labs. So everyone think about that a bit while Carla follows up.
I'm picking up a little bit on what Janya said about, again, sort of on the small scale of a lab. I think it's important that we not only say that their mental health and their well-being is important, but that we also do actions to support those words. And so one of the things we're doing in my group is that on Friday, I remind them that other days of the week are coming up and they should prioritize time to do something that's good for their mental well-being. And then on Monday, we share what everybody did over the weekend to kind of not have every day look the same, but there's days where we talk about the research, and then there's days where we actively, encourage them to take time out of their day and then share that among the group. And I think also just explicitly asking students, how are you doing with being stuck in your apartment working alone? That can go a long way if they're willing to talk to you. But I think it's important for us to not just say their well-being is important, but also try and do actions that support those statements.
All right. So this issue of teaching labs, which was not so much on the agenda, but we're happy, since most of us are dealing with it, we're happy to deal with it. Let me make one more comment to everybody listening, is that the chat is not where we're taking questions. We are taking questions inside the Q&A button. And so if you can use that, then we have a team of people who are lumping those together so that I can see what to ask, okay? So it'd be really helpful to us to direct questions to the Q&A. All right, I think Vanessa is ready to jump in something on this.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about teaching labs, because we had to make a pretty strong or pretty quick, rapid transition in mid-March to teach our teaching labs. I taught a junior level lab, and many graduate students in my department were teaching introductory level labs. And for both of those, our solution involved recording some of the lab videos. So the instructors made recordings and then shared data with students for analysis. For the fall, when we're not in this panic mode and we have a bit more time to prepare, we'd like to do something a little bit more interactive. And so we're still thinking about how we will implement that. But it could involve setting aside time for teams to work remotely, or if people are allowed on campus, part of the lab group being allowed to come in to do the experiment, and meeting virtually with the rest of their lab group.
Right. Other things, yeah, Eric, unmute yourself.
Yeah, we've been coming up with a lot of different ideas. It's not clear which one we're going to go with, but one of them is like Vanessa's idea, maybe having one lab partner in person and one lab partner remote. So then that would just involve having the lab outfitted with a bunch of iPads or something, so you could do some kind of Zoom kind of casting of the lab experience and alternating who's in person and who's remote. We're also thinking about, one thought for the physics labs, for the introductory labs, is that you can use the University of Colorado Boulder FETs to do a lot of very nice simulated lab activities. And that could be done 100% remotely. And then students could be working with their lab partner, again, via Zoom or some other tool, to get the lab partner experience, which is much better, easy to talk to, rather than being 6 feet apart in the lab space. The next idea that we're thinking about, again, not sure, is perhaps just saying that the labs are going to need to teach twice as many labs to have half as many students in each lab, which would maybe involve getting extra funds to hire more graduate TAs and having classes on the weekends. So these are not great solutions, but it's a tricky time. So all of these are methods we're thinking about. But the FETs I definitely recommend if you don't know about them.
Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, so we, like most of you, are encountering these kinds of discussions because of the sheer environment that the introductory labs are taught in. One kind of issue that I think we haven't resolved is the fact that when you have undergraduate students doing hands-on experiments, replicating ballistic pendulums, whatever, there's usually a lot of very close proximity interaction with your TAs. And because your TAs they're the ones who know how the experiments work, and they come over and they are like, oh, you haven't reset your springs or whatever. And there's no easy solution in a socially distanced lab environment to replicate that kind of near influence that a TA has when they're in that one-on-one, face-to-face kind of experience. And we don't know what to do about that. I think, as Eric suggested, virtual labs are something we've discussed a lot. And in particular, in our upper division labs, we're starting to talk about things that we've often skirted around when we talk about curriculum reform. So things like introducing computation, doing analysis of existent real data sets, all of those things have suddenly become very prominently in the front and on the table again. And I think this quarter, we didn't implement any of it, but now looking ahead to the fall and the very strong possibility that fall will, if it's not remote, will be socially distant, that this is an opportunity to really talk about a lot of those ideas about curriculum reform that have been swirling around. And so I expect to see a lot of evolution on that front. And I'd love to hear what other universities end up doing.
All right, it looks like Jenny has something to add there.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that goes along with the labs, which is just peer learning in general. Like, there's a lot of information out there that, like, flipped classrooms and peer learning is a really great way for people to learn physics. And now I just feel like we've been dumped in our laps that you cannot have two people sit next to each other. So then how do you do peer learning? How do you have a lab group? How do you teach collaboration skills when you now have to socially distance? So, you know, I mean, we have something that I think is really great at Syracuse, which is a drop-in help hours room, which gets, you know, huge traffic normally. And now how are we going to offer that really one-on-one help that really the students love and need, and we can't breathe on them, right? Like, so, you know, it's, I think that I also am with Shane, like, I'd love for somebody to tell me that they have the solution to this. You know, when we flipped to virtual, like, we still had people coming into our drop-in hours, but it cut by about, you know, 90% to, you know, to 10% of the normal foot traffic. So I'd love for anybody, if you have any solutions for, are you putting people in full suits to get into peer learning? Like, I mean, what are we gonna do?
All right. So Eric can come back if we need to, but what I'd like to do is, we've been raising a bunch of questions here, issues here, and the question is whether or not it's getting back to the administrators as they put together their fall plans, right? So I'm hearing a lot from you guys about clever ideas to not put two people in the same room. And are you guys seeing that your administrators are working with faculty in order to make those decisions ahead of the fall? Actually, either for research labs or for teaching labs, I think this holds as a question. And so let me ask now, Eric, is this moving away from what you were going to say, or it's okay? All right. So do people feel like there is a feedback from physics faculty towards the administration? Yeah, Jenny, go ahead.
So yeah, our college has created working groups. They're mostly around teaching, actually. There's an entire working group on laboratories. There's one on big classes. There's one on how to work with TAs. And there's one on academic integrity, which hit physics and chemistry really, really hard when we went to online teaching. So we have representatives from physics on these groups. So that gives us a place. We've created in our department like a Google form for people to anonymously give any question they want, so that these questions can be put up. But actually, the place where there's like a ceiling, there's a lack of transparency, is the physical space people. So one of the problems is, like, in my own lab, I feel like I can control my physical space. I could put plastic sheeting up if I wanted. I could put directional information, like, in my lab. But in large lecture rooms, which are going to be cut to 25% capacity or 20% capacity, in the lab rooms, you know, all of these places, like we feel like there's not enough communication or transparency between where we can at least give our problems. The other thing is we know our building, right? And it's being planned presumably by some large committee that, you know, they don't necessarily know our building and as well as we do. And we have ideas for our building. So this, I think, is the one place where we have a real barrier, and that's because it's above the college level. Like I feel like at Syracuse, the college is doing a good job and helping to be transparent and have that communication up and down, but there's a level above the college that is facilities that we're not able to penetrate.
Are there other comments on making sure information travels up the chain? I would say that's something that I definitely agree is an issue that probably needs to develop over the course of the summer. Shane, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I would add the following perspective on this. Illinois is certainly farther behind than other states are in terms of where we are in recovering from this and whether or not we're going to move out of it. I would say that one of the things that I think is probably very true is that if I watch the way the university responds, when an opportunity to move forward and progress out of the pandemic happens, they do come to the front with immediate response. So it's not, I don't feel like we who are not in the central planning committees are in the dark. It's very clear that they are navigating and trying to understand what their options are in a highly uncertain environment. And if I look at the response I get from my university, the rapidity with which they come forward with our next action tells me that they've been planning and talking and thinking about all the possibilities all along. And what many of us think or might regard as being non-transparency is simply them being uncertain as to what the path forward is going to be. We certainly have many opportunities through our department and through our college to voice concerns and issues as faculty, and those clearly filter up. But I think the kind of flow of information back to us, it's dangerous to regard it as a lack of transparency, more as simply they don't know any more than we do, so they're responding in as nimble a way as they can to move an organization as complex as a university around.
All right, so there are still some questions around this. Some questions have been raised about, are some universities sending out lab kits to students? And yes, I do know some instances of that. That's a third thing, that's a third angle besides the virtual PhET labs versus socially distanced lab. There's also the send home parts labs and let people use their smartphones if they have them to collect data and things like that. So there's been a request, you know, so definitely if those are things that are concerned to you, get the conversations going and see who else is trying out things, because I think there's a lot of different things being tried. All right, we're going to move on to another question, I think, that I want to raise. I'm trying to look at the questions and adapt these to cover things a little bit better. So going forward, we're now clear that we're going to be in this for a long time, you know, at least for the fall. And so do you have things that you feel that you need or that you need from administrators in order to be able to have continued virtual teaching and lab management where everybody stays motivated, productive, happy, safe, healthy, and all of that? And this includes, you know, home life issues, right? So what do we need to still have in order to make this work? And this is not one that was on the original list, that I sort of lumped things together. So raise your hand if you've got something to bring in there, and yeah, Sajanya.
And see also. Yeah, I'll add a little bit on the, there's two questions I see pop up that are related to this. One is, there was a question on how are you keeping the open sort of communication with your group, and the other question on, you know, if you have kids, how are you managing the transition to home, which is definitely very challenging. Talking about the open door communication, I think that's an important aspect of everything we do, whether you're at a lab or at a university. I think, so personally in my own group, I have prioritized that. So typically I have weekly meetings with my group, and those meetings, those are largely well-being meetings where we, more generally talk about things. It doesn't have to be, we quickly touch on research and such towards the end, but they largely end up being, how are you coping with things? What are the fun things you have done this time? I know that, generally talking like this, I found that students feel more, more approachable and open up. So, asking directly, tell us, how stressed you are, doesn't usually get you an answer. But if you lighten the environment in general, I found those meetings to be very useful. And some days we don't cover all the research. That's totally fine. There are other venues to cover the research. But if student is opening up and talking about their own situation and what they're doing and need support, definitely that takes priority. That's just one piece. On the question of working from home, as you can see, just looking at my background, I'm talking from my bedroom. My office is taken up by my 2 kids who are 8 and 10, which is usually the case. They like nicer offices. I think that's okay. And sometimes my meetings are from closets when I needed some quiet time, which is again fine. In a lot of my meetings, the students come in and, there's usually asking for cupcakes and whatnot. I have noticed comments from my colleagues where they say, oh, this is largely psychological because people think it's not professional. But it's okay to have that. It's part of life. That's all I want to say on our side. I think it's good for people to see such things because we're all dealing with this at the same time. That's one aspect. On the lab side, though, to support the working from home situation, especially for those who have kids or other personal obligations where you're taking care of an elder or something. The lab had made, so at a lab, you usually enter your time into a system, and they have made accommodations where, they give you a couple of hours a day where, instead of 8, it could be 6, and you try to cover that up at some other time. So those accommodations I thought were very useful.
All right, so some more ideas on how to keep open lines of communication when we don't have an office where people can find us. Yeah, Jenny.
So starting Monday, I'm going to be the new chair at Syracuse University. And I sent out an email today, actually this morning, that not only had the Google form for people to tell us where, what questions and worries they have. And that went to everybody. That didn't just go to faculty. It went to faculty, staff, undergrads, grads, postdocs. So we have a physics all list, and it just went to everybody because I want to hear from the students. But the other thing I did is I'm having a virtual office hour once a week. And I specifically asked for students to hopefully come into that office hour. I don't know if I'm going to get anybody. It'll start next week, but I'm trying to gather. I think keeping these communications open is really important, and just talk. I should say that I tried to have a coffee hour from my lab, and literally nobody came. They did not want to see me or each other, which is fine. They also don't ever want to go to lunch with me when we're in person, so it's fine. I'm very extroverted and they're very introverted. So like there's a dynamic there. But I agree with what a lot of people have been saying about talking about other things to get to the point of talking about the hard things that are hard to talk about is really good. And so that's why I don't know how this is going to work. It might not work at all, but it's something I'm trying to do because I do think we need to hear from the students about what they're concerned about as coming back. My university is definitely open unless Governor Cuomo says we're not, right? And so I'm worried that they're worried. And so what can we do to mitigate that? And again, could I get that information to the higher ups? right? Can I get all the way from undergrad students in physics all the way up to the working groups in the college so that we're getting that pipeline of information in both directions?
So this is, I think, something that's particularly challenging if someone's just starting a group, right? So if someone's, so there's now advice from experienced folks to a couple of new folks who've been asking questions of, what if you're just now building a group, whether it's and building a lab? Do you have advice for some of those folks on things that you might have used when you were building your own lab to create a culture where people talk? Because where people talk, it's also much easier to negotiate solutions to problems before they become problems. So, brainstorm time, advice. Eric.
I don't think I have a great answer to this because this is going to be a tough time to start a lab no matter how you slice it, right? So this is not a great answer. I do think that you want to be even more mindful than everyone else about being thoughtful about whether your students want to work in the lab or not, because that's going to pay big dividends for you in the long term. If they feel like, yeah, that person's trying to start their lab up and they're a new assistant professor, but they're still respecting my concerns about being in the lab and my safety, that will pay off in the long term. So it might be that if you're willing to be in the lab, you will have to do more of the hands-on work to get them started. And it might be that you can recruit really talented students because they understand that you're not going to force them into something uncomfortable. But that definitely is going to put a crimp on productivity. I hope your university is being very thoughtful about how this might affect your progress towards tenure, would be another statement. And this gets back to feeding things upward towards administration. That's my advice, and I don't know how useful it will be.
Do other folks have advice on building culture? Yeah, Jennifer.
Building culture or starting a new lab in this time?
Go for starting a new lab.
My advice to you is just write as many grants as you can, because it takes a lot of practice to write a good grant. And many physicists, I don't know about you all, but I literally had zero practice. And I actually didn't really start my lab right away because it was still kind of under construction anyway. So I did spend my first year writing 10 proposals of various sizes. And I got the 10th one funded. And that was like, I just felt like, woo, right? So, but it was like, I actually had a proposal where somebody was like, it remains to be seen if Jennifer Ross could really have a lab. And I was like, you're right. I'm new at this. Like, that criticism doesn't help me get better at this. But so you get feedback and stuff. So maybe just, this is your shift to be on writing grants duty right now. And really, I think, like Eric said, making sure that people know what hardships you're having so that you can get that time on your tenure clock if you need to. You know, that type of stuff, making sure people are aware that you are doing everything that you possibly are allowed to do, but you can't. How are you going to have somebody help you come and install equipment if you can't be near each other? If you're doing, one of the people was doing a cold atom lab. I've seen what those tabletops look like. You can't tell me that people aren't right up in each other's faces as they're all twiddling all of the optics on the table. So you're just not going to be able to put that together right away. So
this, yeah, Shane. So I think, are you on this topic or on the other question we discussed?
This topic first, but I'm happy to talk about the other question. So let me just make a plea to all of us out there who have been in departments. In the fall, many of us will be onboarding new members of faculty into our departments. And if you think about what it was like when you were a junior faculty member to integrate yourself into the culture and society and happenings of the department, it's hard when you're face to face, and it's going to be even harder in this environment. And so I think it's incumbent on those of us who are working in adjacent groups, who are leaders in our departments or leaders in our units, to make opportunities for our new junior faculty, our new research faculty, our new postdocs to meet everyone and develop those social ties, not their scientific ties, right? They're coming because they have the scientific ties, but develop the social ties that build them into the fabric of your department. And that may mean, you know, inviting them to your group meeting when they might not normally do that. It may mean, integrating them into normal activities that are normally, not done in the department. Do we have a special seminar for faculty to talk about their research? I mean, many of us have big research groups and don't need to recruit students, but maybe we need to do something special to kind of broaden the awareness of what's going on in the department, particularly for our junior faculty coming in. So I think those of you who are leaders and those of you who are in adjacent groups, you should think hard about the people onboarding and think about opportunities you can to build that social fabric that makes departments really great places to work.
All right, so there's a question that's a bit off this topic that we're going to sort of redirect a little bit here too, which is that there may be external pressures right now to open sooner than people feel happy doing, right? And this could be coming from the state for state universities. This could be coming from funding agencies, if there are people who have funds that have deadlines associated with it. So I want to see if there's folks who have ideas about how to deal with those external pressures, which may well be very, very real and pressing, and how to interact with that. So there's someone who wants to jump in on that.
I can start with that.
Just quick. Oh, so Shane's ready to go. All right, go Shane.
Well, no, I don't know if I'm ready to go. But I think I personally feel this very strongly because my safety threshold is very much different, I think, than maybe any of my adjacent colleagues, right? I'm certainly, I'm happy to be an introvert and work at home. I don't feel the distinct lack of seeing people every day at the moment, at least, right? Other than my cats, which you've seen going by. My work environment's just great. I'm happy to be at home and be a hermit. But all things being equal, I do worry a lot personally about the pressure to restart society and get back to normal, whatever normal was. And I think my own personal safety threshold is much, much higher than everyone else's. And so I'm feeling personally a lot of anxiety about having to go back before I'm ready, when the rest of the world just is happy to leap back in, or at least it feels like the rest of the world is happy to leap in. I think what I'm taking a lot of comfort in right now is if I watch my university talk about the fall, they are very much aware of the safety factor for all of the students, particularly in the instructional setting. And I think my impression is that that level of safety is one that they're not easily going to be able to distinguish between instructional settings and work settings for everyone else. And so I think in a very real way, universities, because they are big machines, as we said just a moment ago, they can't have fluctuating policies and policies that are uneven across the institution. And so I'm really kind of personally, I think, looking at what they're doing with instructional safety and thinking that that's going to be the extension to kind of general safety across the workplace. As for things like tenure and demands from the funding agencies, so far my experience, others may have different ones. I've seen all of them be very aware, at least, that there are pressures on everyone right now, that they can't meet deadlines, that tenure clocks might be delayed because of not being in the lab and so on. But others should speak on if they've had different experiences there.
So other concerns about external pressures? I say I've been happy with the way my funding agencies have had these conversations with me. I think one of the external pressures that we are all prone to right now is that the social distancing guidelines, in fact, are releasing in many of our states as we speak, right? So this is now something that, every couple of weeks, there's a set of rules that change by either the local or the federal governments. And so are people seeing issues with that regarding your maybe your institution's own response and contingency plans either being in or out of sync with that? Do you have concerns about that opening? Because there may well be students who are not prepared. Just because we have permission to now open a little more does not mean it's a requirement that a particular person open more, right? And so discussion about that is now on the table. releasing of social distancing guidelines as a moving target. Yeah, Carla.
All right, don't have a great answer, but I'll take a stab at it. I think I'm sort of in the similar position as Shane mentioned, that I feel my own threshold for safety is much higher than everybody else's around me. And so one way I've approached is to be very open, sort of communicating what my needs are and communicating both upwards, but also to my group, why I'm continuing to do certain things, even though we're technically not required to do them anymore. And my feeling is that those around me, especially in my group, are very appreciative that I am open about why I'm doing things and how I'm doing things, because I guess it validates them also being open about or being more cautious than is allowed. So that's the approach I've taken. I don't know if it's the best answer. Maybe other people can jump in and have additional thoughts.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, so Tanya, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing a mix of things here. I mean, there's pressures, you know, we get as PIs or faculty or lab scientists, and then there is also the layer of pressure we give to our own team. And you know, I keep going back to mental health and psychology, but this is also, you know, taking myself, you know, like not excluding myself. Faculty are very ambitious. I just wanted to speak the other side of it, right? From my experience, from my higher ups, my funding agencies, they've all been very, very accommodating, especially with if you're working with Office of Science. You know, those funds can carry over with, if you're at a lab, you do these what are called LDRD projects, which are, you can transfer them to other year, but the other accommodations you can do, you know, share with other groups and then sort of work later with their funds, things like that. You know, but given that we ourselves are, it's probably a culture thing. We're very ambitious. And I have also seen cases where, you know, there is not much of pressure from higher ups or funding agencies, but the group leaders themselves pushing the team to still do the work. This takes into account, you know, again, this goes back to not just the labs where, you know, most people are kind of on board on, oh, let's be safe, let's keep the distance, let's make sure PPE is there and go there. I'm more talking about the work that we do at home in this stressful time. I think even there, I've seen cases where, you know, unreasonable pressure being put in the team. Oh, all you can do now is meetings and analysis and computing. So let's just keep doing that. But people do, I have seen meetings, 4-hour meetings, people just kept going at it without breaks. So, you know, this sort of takes, so I think there are challenges like that, external pressures, but, you know, pressures the PIs and the group leaders themselves are putting on the team. I think this needs to propagate at all levels on the well-being of everybody.
So the flip side of that, let me just bring this up, is that, or do anybody have experience with people who think they are more invincible than you think is you're not comfortable with their feelings of invincibility? Jenny.
I don't think my students feel they're invincible, but they definitely were not happy when I was like, we're all staying home a week before the state closed. And I was like, you're not going in. And they were like, but I'm, and I was like, no, I'm sorry. We're going home now. And we'll figure out how to work from home and we'll do some things and it'll be all right. But honestly, it helped a bit that some of my students had family in China, because that really helps to give a personal interaction about like what it's going to be like when we're all stuck at home, and you know that we'll be able to survive. And it actually made more of the rest of the lab understanding of like what it meant for us to be social distancing. Having that internationality in my lab was incredibly, incredibly helpful for that.
Other comments on that? Yeah, Shane.
So I just want to add kind of 3 things that I think have been surprising to people in discussions we've had, but I just want to say them out loud so people can think about them themselves, bring them up in conversations that they've had. Even if the universities go back to people being on campus, one of the things that's going to constrain us here in Illinois is if the public school system doesn't go back to school, people aren't going to be able to go back to work because they have kids at home. right? And so that will stop a lot of people. Another thing to be cognizant of, I think, is the fact that in Illinois, we can certainly progress towards reopening, but if they see cases spike again, we will regress. And there is a lot of overhead associated with get everyone back on campus, getting labs started up again, all of that sort of stuff. And if you're constantly starting up and shutting down, starting up and shutting down, then that will cause significant strain on the system that's already strained. And so I think the desire to go back to work, you really have to tamp it down with, let's wait and see this is going to stick before we actually go back to work, right? So that's a big thing. And then the last thing is my students are spread across the country right now. We couldn't go back to work if we wanted to because they're not here, right? They're at home with their families and many of them aren't on campus. And so going back to work may be impractical if your group isn't there at all, so.
All right, so in terms of the fact that, you know, we aren't immediately going back in the lab, do people want to speak a bit about how they have been finding good projects for their students and postdocs to work on in order to make people stay happy while working virtually? Particularly, this is for people who have very laboratory bound, which is not everybody on this panel. Yeah, Vanessa, go ahead.
I mean, I think with my own research group, we've had to acknowledge that we can't do the things that we were doing in our optics lab from home, but we can shift to other things like writing and reading papers, things that we would normally need to spend some time on, but might not have as much time as we would like to work on because we were busy with other lab things. So this has been an opportunity to focus more on writing.
Jenny, you have some stuff too?
Yeah, just really briefly, we also shifted to writing, but I actually started a simulation. We pulled up lamps, and one student is learning lamps and is simulating things, and that's not my normal style. I really enjoy being surprised by science. I don't want a prediction necessarily. I'm an empiricist. But this student is working on the same project, but using this kind of modeling package that he was able to start working on. And so hopefully that will end up with a paper that has some modeling and some experiment in it at the end of the next year or so.
Yeah, and I will concur that my own lab has started some more modeling and theoretical based stuff than we would normally do. And I think this actually has some benefits. It's stretching us intellectually. Yeah, so Janya.
Yeah, I just want to add the other side of the challenge for this. I've seen many cases in my own group also. I have virtually hired, 2 postdocs. I tried to hire one summer student and other people. But the challenge other side, as I was going through this process, I noticed that there are cases who have been affected by this. If you're virtually hiring somebody for work from home, sorry, it's going into hiring, but it's also, summer students, all sorts of things. If you're trying to have somebody work virtually, say, I'm a very lab focused group, but I think the challenge is that you do still need to justify to management that, they can do substantial amount of work offsite or on their computer. And I just want to acknowledge that that's not easy to do. And there are cases where students and postdocs and others have been impacted by this, where they weren't actually hired in the process. And I think there are many things that come out of this. The one thing is that, if you're being hired as a postdoc, you have a schedule to finish your graduation by a certain time. So you don't earn money after that. So because you're dependent on this new job starting. And if somehow it's not possible to justify, working offsite, then you can't start the job on time. And as a result, you're not being paid. I've seen cases like that, and that's a big challenge in this whole process.
Yeah, Jenny.
I just want to follow up. I have a student who's very, very worried about OPT being canceled, international student about to graduate. And we have a variety of contingency plans for her, including one where she would basically defend her thesis and be completely done and then be all but degree so that she can ride out as a grad student for an extra year, begging the department to let her TA or do whatever, just so that we, you know, in the goal of waiting out the current administration's whatever craziness about immigration. So we have a series of backup plans. I also made a backup, she's Iranian, so I made a backup plan for her to move to Canada to finish her PhD if she needed to. We made that plan about 3 years ago. So I think, yeah, exactly. I'm just in the same vein of like working with each student and like to getting them to where they need to be, and to help them so that they can, you know, continue with their career. For our incoming foreign graduate students, who will very much likely not be able to get visas and not be able to join us, we are going to have all of our grad courses be remote only. That also gives me the opportunity to stash all of my vulnerable faculty in those courses so they do not have to come to campus. So I'm moving all of the faculty who have health issues into grad courses. They're going to continue to teach from home, but then we can offer them so that international students can virtually matriculate. So in the hopes of not having them be delayed a full year in their careers. And so we're still working out the bugs on this. It might not be possible, but at the very least, if they could come in and take their qual exam and just move on with their lives and not be stuck. It's another thing that we've been batting around.
All right, so Eric, and then I'm going to ask a follow-up question that brings us back to younger students.
That was my one quick comment I wanted to make a lot earlier was Emory is assuming that any student, for whatever reason we don't need to know, might want to be 100% remote in the fall. So we're thinking about that in terms of our introductory labs, as well as our graduate students and everyone in between. And fortunately, Emory's doing a fairly good, strong policy on the faculty too, that again, they could opt to be remote in the fall for whatever reason not needing to be disclosed.
Yeah, I think there's a number of places are doing that students and faculty can allow for as many people who need to be remote. So there's some we've been talking about projects that are great for students who are already involved in them and know there's a deadline and can work on paper writing or theoretical projects from home. But as we integrate new students into our group, or if we are brand new groups, what are some ideas for starter projects that new people can be doing before they may never have been in the lab even, but want to join the lab group? Ways to help. Yeah, so Danya, and then Shane.
I'm not currently dealing with this situation, but you know, projecting my experience during non-COVID time with students, I think with the students who are in the first or second year, the biggest thing is they do need a lot of face time and networking because they're ramping up, and there are many questions. If you're ramping up on a software, there's like simple questions, simple to us, but not for them because they're starting, that they want help with. Something I could think of, you know, that I saw working with the other groups is that, you know, sometimes having like definitely a lot more meetings because you can't be face to face. So in general, the meeting frequency has increased anyway. But I think these students may need one-on-one meeting in addition to the group meetings that one would have. The other one I noticed that would work is that if you sort of do a working session on Zoom where you're on chat and the students are trying something, but you're not putting the students on the spot to ask questions right away or trying to just answer the questions they come. But then they sort of see you on the video, they're working, and they know that you're there and ask questions. That's one thing. And also networking or encouraging the students with the postdocs in the group so they can all try to talk together, and encouraging the postdocs to help out the students more. I mean, those some of the solutions that I've seen working in other groups.
Yeah. So Shane, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. So let me tell you two things that we do that may be helpful. So one of the things about motivation and getting work and being able to make progress or get into something is that we're lacking that kind of co-working environment that we normally have when we're in the center together. And so one of the things that we do is we have a centralized Zoom room where people can just sign in and work, not because we're talking, but because there's a group of people, like we're all here together in that room. And so something that I learned about from a graduate student actually is they will do something called a delta J. So delta J is an incremental unit of work, right? So they'll take 15-minute or half-hour increments and say, this is what I'm going to do for my delta J for the next 15 minutes. And then they'll just go back to their working, heads down, just like we are here working. And it seems to help them move along. But since they're in that environment together, someone can say, I don't understand what, Hun's rules are all about, or whatever it is you happen to working on. And someone's there who can say, oh, I use this book for that, or, use this link. And so it provides a little bit of that collaborative environment without being, kind of isolated at home. The other thing I do with new students, well, we do this in my group sometimes, but I really like is we do a journal club that's not a journal club. And so what we do is we take the archive listings for AstroPH, which are the preprint archive, and we absolutely forbid anyone from reading any of the papers. We get together and we read only the abstracts, and based on the abstracts, we have open discussions about what we think it means, what the implications might be, what other interesting ideas will come from that. But that allows us to not formally review papers. It allows us to not have to be constrained by whatever the authors did. By just looking at the abstracts, it kind of helps us look at the world through our own scientific lens and through our own interests and what the group's working on. And it's been very successful in developing what I call that whiteboard brainstorming that we often do. And so those are a couple of things that we do that your groups may or may not find useful.
All right, so we have 10 minutes remaining, and there's 2 topics that are still sort of on the table we wanted to hit. So everyone to prep that this is what's coming. So one is that how we deal with the networking required to do good science and to advance our careers. And the second is what the hiring prospects are for the coming year for folks that are in situations where they may be able to speak about that. So let's talk about the networking question. Since there are no in-person conferences, how are we doing that? All right, Eric.
A thing is that it's very easy to set up a Zoom call or Skype call with anybody these days because we're all happy to do that. That's a natural way we're doing things now. So reach out to whoever you want to talk to, and if there's something you want to talk to them about, they'll probably say yes. And then the other thought is that the graduate students in our department, the awesome graduate students, have organized a summer colloquium series. And they're aiming at younger people to be giving the talks, postdocs and young faculty. And that's something that we would not normally do during the summer. But again, now they're just doing it over Zoom. So it makes it very easy. So that's how they're networking. And also it's bringing some really good talks to our department.
Yeah, and the plus of that is that no one has to have the travel money in hand to go to any of these things. And so I think in some senses it makes it easier to do the networking. So Janya.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's true that we, on the conferences question especially, I think it's true that conferences are being online, but a lot of them are also being canceled. So in my community, for example, towards, before the end of this year, there's only 2 major conferences, and there could only be like, maybe 10 speakers that could go from a given collaboration. So that's definitely putting people at a disadvantage. I don't know how to mitigate that because visibility at conferences is a very important factor, especially when you're applying for faculty jobs and such. The one thing, that may help in this scenario is that although conferences are canceled, a lot of the universities and labs are still doing colloquia, seminars, graduate student seminars focused for undergraduates. So I think working with supervisors, or if you're a faculty yourself, working with your broader collaboration, and usually collaborations have talks committees and whatnot, trying to get opportunities for seminars and colloquia would be one good way to move forward, because I think those are still going on and an option.
And I think young people should not be embarrassed to email a senior person and offer to give a lab group talk, to their group. Because, we're looking for ways for our students to stay engaged with what's hot and current. And I've been involved in several of these already that have just been completely informal. It's like you're visiting someone else's group meeting, low pressure, and, high impact. And
My
so
group's tired of hearing from me already, so
yeah.
please help us out.
But I think that's a very good point, Karen. If you're in bigger, larger collaborations or, you know, any size collaboration, I think collaboration venues, instead of doing week-long collaboration meetings, people are doing few hours per day stretched over weeks. So I think those venues are a little bit higher visibility within a, you know, within larger groups. So that's another option.
Jenny.
So I was going to address the hiring.
Okay, so let's move on to the hiring question. What do we know about hiring prospects for the next year?
Yeah, so I've had postdocs, like, who are not mine postdocs. They're just, they're students that I've mentored randomly and pinging me saying, you know, we're thinking about going to industry. We're not, you know, we were thinking academia before, but this isn't, you know, but those of us on the panel have lived through a time like this, right? The jobs aren't going away because of the disease. The jobs are going away because of the anticipated loss of money of all of these universities, right? So, and we already lived through this in 2008. And so we can, it's going to be worse. Don't get me wrong. It will be worse. But what we saw, we can look at the lessons from that. And what I saw, you know, I got my job right before, and then, you know, nobody was hiring for many years after that. But what I saw when we finally were opening up again and had positions, we had a lot of positions, and there were very few people who kind of stayed the course, you know, through that. Many people left and left academia. And so what I would say is, if this is really something you want, and in particular, you know, that you maybe figure out a way to do another postdoc to hang on to until people can come back, right? Until these jobs can come back. If this is what you really, really want. And what I saw actually, which was disappointing, is that the people who got pushed out were women and minorities. That they left because they were like, I can't handle this, like, this isn't working for me, I'm going to industry. And that really, I felt like, was a sink. It was a dip, right? And so if, you know, be communicating with people, get second postdocs. People are going to understand a long postdoc if you are really into this. And so, you know, or if you go to an industry position where you can still publish. You know, I would love to hire more people with industry experience. I think that's fantastic, right? You are going to be much better mentor to the majority of our students who are not going into academia. So that to me is fine, but the problem that people have when they go into industry is they have a publication dip, which is something that a lot of people are really looking at. So just thinking about these things, if this is something you want to do and you really want to be here, let's think of ways as individuals to continue to hold on to do it, right? Because I don't want to lose another mini generation of women and minorities staying in physics and moving into academia because of this economic decline.
Yeah, and I will say that, I mean, I think the postdoc positions will be open because our funding seems like it will be contiguous, right? Yeah. All right. So Dana, you had something to add here, I think, right?
Yeah. So I have hired I hired one postdoc internationally and another postdoc very soon. There's also summer hiring. I just want to mention on specifically from my institute, some of the accommodations being made. And this is just to, you know, sort of share, you know, that many other places are also doing this. The virtual onboarding is the process that's been set up to mitigate, since we can't do in-person hiring, and especially for international members, this is a big challenge. So Los Alamos, for example, we are opening up hiring for postdocs virtually. This is a 3-month term temporary hiring, but hopefully, you know, and then we go by how the situation evolves, and this could be either extended or the person may be able to travel. That's one aspect of it. Summer students are also being hired virtually if you can show that they can do some simulations and other work. But I'm noticing that many institutions have these accommodations, and it took me some work from my side that, although I knew virtual onboarding was there, especially navigating all the loops with the international, you know, policies and such, took some time. So I thought it wouldn't be possible to do this international onboarding. This is just to say
It has
that
worked. Excellent.
Yeah, it has worked. Yeah.
All right. So this is the one question that I want to hear forward-looking. Is there one thing that's positive that you think that we are going to take forward out of this, that we will, whether it involves disinfection or social distancing or online practices, something that we're going to take forward, and we'll do a rapid round of something we'll take forward. And I think that for me, it's going to be the ability to just pop into and out of quick seminars. I hope there are more virtual conferences that allow me to lower my carbon footprint and just get used to talking to people with virtual seminars. That's the thing I hope goes forward.
I was going to say ninja-like Zoom skills. That's what I'm happy with.
Everyone just jump in.
All right, I'll jump in next. Lower the fact that we're doing so many things virtual hopefully lowers the barrier for access for schools that have less funding for people, just in general access, because you don't have to travel and have the funding for that. But I'd also like to add a wish to the final words, is that whatever we do going forward, that we don't forget about equity, kind of echoing Jenny's comment about minorities being more strongly affected, that those of us that are in the acting powers keep that even more so in mind than we usually do and should do.
Final closing wishes of stuff going forward?
I'll jump in and say, I think, I knew that we need to listen to people as we try to be, better diversity, inclusion, and everything. I think more listening is what I'm aiming at moving forward.
Anyone else? And if not, Tiffany has some closing sentences to bring us out.
Yeah, so we're super thankful for our panelists and our moderator sharing their expertise and experience. If we did not get to your questions, we encourage you to send them to webinars@aps.org and we'll forward them to the panelists and get a response for you. The video will be uploaded within 48 hours at go.aps.org/summer-webinars. And that link was in your invite as well, so you'll be able to access it there. And also, we'll include a survey so that we can address topics that you would like to hear about over the course of the summer. So please also, you can also email that to webinars@aps.org. Thank you so much to our panelists, and stay well and healthy.
And thank you for organizing this.
Okay.